20 of the top pitching prospects, 1 minute on each of them. Within that 1 minute, I will tell you something distinct about what they do and also their risk factor, why I might be wrong about this individual rank. At the top of your screen, you're going to see their name, their handedness, and their team alongside a one-line snippet, kind of summation of what I think of them as a prospect, and then I will rank out the pitches they throw in order of their usage. Bottom left, you will see their face, and then I'll switch to some video on each of these guys, and I will be in this corner here talking to you about these pitchers. Why don't we start with number 1, Jackson Jobe, right-handed pitcher for the Detroit Tigers. The distinct thing about him is that he has really strong peripheral pitches. He has a cutter that's about 90 miles per hour. It has 5 inches of induced vertical break and 5 inches of sweep. It's kind of bordering on a slider. This is one of my favorite pitches he throws. I think it allows him to be effective versus left-handed hitters. And he has a nasty changeup too, a ton of screwball action on this pitch. Near 40% swing and miss on the offering, one of his strongest swing miss pitches. As you see, this is the ideal pitching prospect. It's a hard fastball with carry from a reasonable release. There's multiple shapes here, which brings me to the risk factor. There are big shapes here. This kind of reminds me in a way of Grayson Rodriguez, a little bit smaller of a package overall in terms of who he is as a human, in terms of his body size. But I think that could be the slight concern here. We've seen some walks jump up this year. Maybe that's a limiting factor. Maybe he needs another thing that he can strike, although I do think the fastball will get him there. I really like him. He's number 1 for a reason. There's also some injury risk here. This is a risk factor you could throw on nearly any of these pitchers. He had a lumbar spine problem in 2023 and a hamstring strain this season. That's not great. I know, I understand, but he's still number 1 for a reason. This dude has nasty stuff. Noah Schultz, the lefty from the White Sox, is number 2. Sky-high ceiling, wacky body size and release, and that is what is distinct about him. He's 6'9", and yet his extension, how far he releases the ball down the mound, is only 6 feet. That is insanity. I don't really know if there's another pitcher in the modern era that had this kind of low extension for his height. The average extension from a height perspective is about 110% of that height. This is like an 80%-ish of your height. I think that does create some weird release angles for him in terms of being a huge guy who actually nets out to a low release. Kind of reminds me a bit of like Yuri Perez or Paul Skeens, but he's a lefty. This is really wacky in terms of a look, and it backs up by the fact that I think a lot of what he throws grades out well. Everything is hard. They added a cutter this year for him, which I think is a good pitch. He's got a big sweeper. He's got a changeup as well. The problem, if you're asking for the risk factor, is the fact that maybe this low extension isn't good, and maybe the fastball swing and miss catches up with him. He doesn't miss a lot of bats with it. It's more of a sinker shape. I think it's more for weak contact than whiffs. The counter to that is just he will use everything else for whiffs. But this dude is one of the wackier, aesthetically pleasing prospects, perhaps, on this list. He's very confusing. I think that there's sky-high upside here because of how the release ties into everything from a shape perspective. On Noah Schultz, he's a pretty interesting pitcher. Bubba Chandler, a righty for the Pittsburgh Pirates, is one of my favorite arms, I think. I have him at number 3. He's the carry fastball king for a very simple reason. The fastball is elite. It's about 3 miles per hour above the average fastball. He sits about 97. He's 2 inches of vertical break above the average four-seam fastball, and he's lower in terms of his release height that he's achieving that vertical break from. You add that all up, and you have one of the strongest stuff grades on his fastball. This is a plus fastball, borderline plus in my opinion. It is nasty. He lost a little bit of vertical break when he got to AAA and started using the Major League Baseball, but it's still really good and really strong. The risk factor with him is that I think the breaking balls for him have to be harder. We saw Jared Jones in the same organization really push the velocity on that slider, and it turned into a nasty pitch. Chandler's kind of throwing 2 breaking balls that are very close in shape, a slider at 85-ish and a curveball around 81. I think eventually into next season, that slider pushes up. I want to see this thing like 88 to 89. I don't mind if it adds some carry to it. That is the pitch that you're watching. It has to become more distinct, the breaking ball. If he doesn't do that, then maybe there's some risk in the profile. Number 4 is River Ryan from the Dodgers. I understand he's injured. This list came out before he was injured, so we have to keep him at this rank to make sure it's consistent with what I have in my Substack. I really like this guy. I understand it's an elbow injury. We're getting to the point where elbow injuries, I think for the most part, are not massive risk factors. This is a really deep mix in terms of what he throws. It's 6 pitches, 5 pitches, 6 pitches in terms of his mix together. I love the curveball here in particular. A lot of curveballs are average velo, average shape, etc. I generally only see those as early count pitches, steal strikes. If you want to bury it to a lefty, etc., go for it. Ryan's curveball is 83 miles per hour with the same amount of vertical drop and sweep as a curveball that's about 3 ticks lower than that. That allows the pitch, I think, to be used in 2-strike situations. He could use it versus lefties. He could use it against righties as a berry pitch late in counts. He could use it early. That pitch, I think, really helps him become more of a platoon neutral pitcher. Hopefully he recovers from this injury. I understand that I'm not going to use the injury tag for the why this could be a poor rank on him, but I do understand that that is the risk factor here, right? We'll see how he bounces back from this injury. I swear I'm not going to go to injury a lot more than any of these guys. I know I mentioned it with Jobe, and I already mentioned it with Ryan. The rest of these guys, we're going to focus on things that are not injury-based. River Ryan is a very good pitcher. I'm pretty confident he will be great for the Dodgers. Rhett Lowder is a Wake Forest product. He's one of the first guys to come out of that pitching lab there with Mike McFerrin, who is now with the Athletics running some of their minor league pitching development. He's a righty. This is kind of a can feel overcome average stuff. He's been a personal favorite of mine for a while because I'm always kind of looking for the guy that I think understands pitching and has the cerebral nature to pitching to allow him to kind of unlock as he turns over lineups, etc. He had a great quote in a David Loria piece on FanGraphs about how he loves thinking about attacking hitters a third time. I want that guy in my rotation, especially if the league decides to do anything crazy in terms of, have to pitch a certain amount of innings, etc. Rhett Lowder is fun. It's 4 pitches. All of them are kind of averages. I guess the main problem here. So this distinct thing is that I think he's anecdotal, which I may not go to a lot on this list, but he's very distinct in terms of how I think he approaches and thinks about pitching. The slider's the best pitch. It's 2 fastballs and a changeup off that. The problem here is just the stuff may not be that good enough. He's like 93 to 94. There's not really distinct shape on anything. There's not really outlier release traits. It's low extension, which I think maybe helps his command a bit. There's a lot of holes you can pick in the profile, but this dude throws strikes. It's 4 pitches, and it's average stuff. So if you can look at him and foresee a guy that's average stuff with plus command, there's a lot of guys that have long careers with that archetype. I think Lowder is one of them. Cade Horton is number 6 here, another guy who went down with injury before I set this list up, and I swear his risk factor is not the injury part, although he is a little bit undersized, which I think is something that often correlates with injuries. Besides the point, this has become a true 4-pitch arm. Out of Oklahoma, he was basically a 2-pitch guy. It was 4-seam and a nasty slider, which he learned pretty late in his pitching career. Off that, he's developed kind of a death ball curveball with the Cubs and a changeup that has become almost his primary pitch to left-handed hitters. He's throwing it like 20% of the time. It's a really nasty offering. I like it. The risk factor here, though, is that his fastball is cut. It's kind of a cut. It's barely cut ride, but he just cuts the heck out of it, kind of like a Spencer Turnbull. And I don't think there's a long track record of that pitch unlocking pitchers with huge upside. Perhaps this is more of like a rotational guy. They shut him down this year. He will come back and pitch next year. He's obviously a part of their pitching plans long term. He struggled really mightily at AAA when he came up. I think he had some problems with the ball, with the major league ball that he was using at AAA. He was cutting it even more than he normally does. I think he needs to carry it a bit. It's an interesting arm. The Cubs really like distinct fastball shapes. He aligns with that. The risk factor is that the 4-seam is not good enough because of how he cuts the pitch, and it's never going to miss bats. It's more of a contact manager, etc. We will see how he progresses, but I do like him long-term still. Number 7 is Chase Dollander. Really fun pitcher here who shot up on my list from my preseason rank because he's just dominated. The main thing here is that you have one of the flattest vertical approach angles on this list. So his ball approaches the zone at a very flat angle because of a combination of velocity. Doesn't allow the pitch a ton of time to drop. He's like 96. He generates a pretty good amount of carry on the pitch. It's right around 16 inches of vertical break right now, which is slightly above average, but it's even more above average when you factor in his release height, which is down at about 5.5 feet, which is 0.3 feet lower than the average. That is pretty good. If you could get above average carry from a below average release at above average velocity, you will end up with a well-graded fastball. His is a plus fastball. The risk factor is a very simple one. This is Coors Field. Everything he throws is going to contract to the center of the zone, a pitch plot, so to speak, not the zone itself. And that will limit, I think, the shape upside and the stuff plus that he has at home. I wonder whether he becomes an entirely different pitcher at home than on the road, which would be a fascinating kind of petri dish case. I just don't think the Rockies maybe are sharp enough to figure that out. I'm worried about Coors for sure, but the results that he's gotten on the 4-seam and the slider are fantastic. Eventually, he's going to have to come off throwing the fastball about almost 70% of the time. You cannot do that in Coors Field with the shape that he has, but the slider's really good. He wasn't good in his last year at Tennessee before he got drafted, but the year before that, that thing was nasty. It's 2+ pitches here. There's some curveball feel, which reminds me of River Ryan in terms of how hard he's throwing it, but it's Coors, and make of that what you will. Andrew Painter has not pitched in 2 years. That may be all I really need to say about him. This is one that I'm ranking because a lot of other people still have him at the top of their list. I believe he's the #1 pitching prospect on FanGraphs. He hasn't touched the mound in a major league game or pro-affiliated game in 2 seasons. The last time we saw him was spring 2022. He looked amazing in that outing. He had like 4 pitches that are all basically almost double plus. It's the reason you have him this high. There was feel around that, but I can't get over the fact that he hasn't pitched in 2 years. So I put him outside my top 7. I have no idea what to make of him. If you're a Philly fan and you know anything about him and what he's doing, please let me know. No one knows. We haven't seen him in 2 years. Maybe he throws some Florida games in the offseason. We all have more confidence in it. But for now, I truly have no idea what to do with Painter. So he's my number 8. Jacob Misiorowski is number 9. This guy has huge extension. He's a massive dude. You could see it in any of the video you watch of him. 7.4 feet on his extension would be greater extension. So he's releasing the ball further down the mound than about 99% of major league pitchers. You're talking Logan Gilbert, Alexis Diaz territory. That is going to help everything. The huge problem here is this guy cannot find the zone to save his life. He had 2 starts right before the shutdown in July for the break where he K'd like 24 over 12 innings. And apart from that, he's walking 4+ a game. There's massive reliever risk here. He's really young. If he figures it out, this is probably the most distinct look you can imagine from a right-handed pitcher, I believe, in the major leagues. It's fascinating stuff. Banger curve. I love the cutter here. Very similar to Jackson Jobe in terms of it being hard and having more slidery shape. Fastball's great too, but you got to figure out how to get this guy in the zone. It's a massive risk factor for him. Number 10, I'm going to do back-to-back recent draft picks. Chase Burns is my number 1 pitching prospect from the most recent draft, righty from the Reds. I have him as the stuff plus king of the 2024 draft, which is 100% accurate. The fastball here is cut ride. It's really, really hard. He's got a nasty slider off it, which I really think is the differentiator for him. It's 87 plus with 8 inches of sweep. That is much harder than your average slider by about 2 to 3 ticks, especially for that level of sweep. If he adds anything else in the mix here, I think because he throws everything so hard, it will grade out plus. There's a lot of clay to mold here, which I really like on him. The distinct thing is that banger slider. The problem here is that his fastball got hammered by left-handed hitters in college, allowed like a 650 plus slug. He's got to figure that out. I do think the counter to it, playing devil's advocate on the risk factor for him, is just that he could throw his changeup more. It was a really good pitch. It separated a lot off his forcing fastball. He just didn't really need it in D1. So if that pitch comes up, I think you mitigate some of the risk here. He's clay, and I think the Reds could play with that clay pretty nicely. I like him a lot. He's my number 1 pitching prospect from the draft. I think he's a guy who could rise. Hagen Smith is my number 2 pitching prospect from the draft, lefty from the White Sox. Very, very different pitcher than Chase Burns. Burns relies on Chase. Hagen Smith had gaudy in-zone whiff numbers. In-zone whiff, you're talking how often do you swing and a miss at a pitch in the zone. Around 30% is great for major league hit pitchers. Lefties in particular, I think that might shoot up a little because you have some deception. In college, Hagen Smith had a 60% swing miss in the zone on his four-seam fastball, and it was just around the same for his slider. This is like the ultimate, is there something visually happening here that allows him to be very good? And will that sustain at higher levels? I don't know, honestly. I think the fastball is distinct. I don't think it's like an outlier four-seam shape. I do believe it's, it's 95, so it's hard, which is going to buy back any shape issues it has. But it's pretty two-plane. It's like a Jesus Luzardo four-seam where it's like 15 inches of vertical, slightly below average release. He's got like 12-ish arm side. We'll see how that contracts with the Major League Baseball. So it's a question of the risk factor being, does the visual deception he create work at higher levels? And perhaps as a result of that, maybe doesn't get as much chase, the end zone comes down, etc. He becomes more average. But the White Sox are kind of, I don't want to say on the bleeding edge of some pitching development stuff, but they're interesting with Brian Bannister. So Smith is a very fun arm. David Festa from the Twins is my number 12. We've seen him at the major league level already. He's a righty. I have him as a lanky slider monster, which makes a lot of sense. This fastball is really good here. He cuts it a bit, but he does carry it. The slider off it. It's gotten good results pretty much everywhere he's gone. Maybe not as great in the major leagues, which maybe pushes me into the idea of what they've done with like a Louis Varland, where they give him a cutter and kind of a more divey slider. I think we might see that into this offseason, but right now it's big extension with a decent release. So that allows the fastball to play up a bit more. So a lot of the time we're looking at the big extension to pull down the release such that your vertical break on the pitch is higher relative to what it would be for someone at that average release. So if you have low extension in a high slot and you carry your fastball, it's not going to be perhaps as distinct as what he's doing with good extension. Not, the level of some of the other guys we're talking about, Misiorowski, etc. But it's good. It's 3 pitches. The changeup's gotten crazy swing miss everywhere. The problem, I would say, is if he doesn't ever generate the separated breaking balls we're talking about. I like the slider. It grades out well, but again, it didn't perform great at the major league level. So maybe there's not enough righty swing miss in here long term, but I'm expecting to split these breaking balls and give me 2 heading into next season. That might change the profile a bit here and mitigate some of that risk factor. Will Warren is number 13. He is a prototypical Yankee arm, which is the distinguishing factor here. It's a very deep mix, a lot of pitches, four-seam and a sinker, which both grade out above average, not super hard on the velocity side, and it's a massive sweeper, which I guess is your second kind of distinct factor. There's a second slider in there, which he calls a cutter, and then a changeup as well. A lot of these Yankee arms have a lot of pitches. They throw from the lower slot here, allow themselves to get nasty sweep at velocity, natural supinators, then they figure out a four-seam they could keep up in the zone. Michael King is the really good example of this. The less great example is probably like a Hagen Smith-Shawver type. We'll see where Warren ends up, but I think because there's two distinct fastballs here, I like how he'll be able to mitigate some of the lefty issues he may have long-term, but that is the risk factor. If he never figures it out for his lefties, then he's going to have a lot of problems. I would definitely follow the Michael King template here. Hope he can figure out the command side. I think his sinker to righties at the major league levels has been too far away. I want that more inside and give me the four-seam up away, which you've seen Michael King do in spurts. This is basically Michael King 2.0. If it doesn't pan out, it's Hagen Smith-Shawver, which is more of a kind of a weird reliever type that can spot start. But I like Warren. I have him top 15 because I do believe he's more Michael King than Hagen Smith-Shawver. Kumar Rocker is number 14. I believe I'm the hottest on him in the industry, at least at the time of my list's release. This is one that I think the risk factor I'll give you before the positives is just I might be overreacting to what I've seen in small samples, which is the fact that this dude throws absolute gas. It's a 97 plus on two distinct fastballs. He throws his sinker more than his four-seam. Then he also has basically an invisible slider. There's some natural variation in that pitch. It's kind of divey at 95, and then it comes up to 91, becomes a bit more of a cutter. I don't believe that's different shapes. I believe it's more hand manipulation, which is similar, again, to a Paul Skeens type. I know I've comped two guys to Paul Skeens here. I swear I'm not doing that one for one. It's just more the element of what they are doing as pitchers is similar to what Paul Skeens has succeeded with. Velocity and a ton of strikes with 7-foot extension. This is a top pitching prospect mold. I believe the industry is just kind of hesitating on him because of the injury track record, but that's not my risk factor. My risk factor is that I am overreacting to what I have seen from him at AA, which is exceptional stuff. There's an argument he's a top 10, top 5 guy. I'm just maybe hesitating slightly relative to everyone else. Even I'm hesitating on him, but I just love what I saw from a velocity side, the distinct shapes, the slider, etc., the whiffs he's gotten. I don't think this regresses much with the major league ball either in terms of what he's doing shape side. I like him a lot. I think he's a huge riser into next year. I bet he even breaks camp with the Rangers in 2025. Brandon Sproat of the Mets kind of feels like a Pokemon last name here. Strikes and secondaries is what I have for him. He's an interesting guy. I will admit Eric Longenhagen from FanGraphs was the guy that put me onto him. I think he's interesting. I think maybe he's perhaps slightly overhyped, though. Maybe that's just me playing devil's advocate on a guy that I wasn't totally blown away with from the numbers. The distinct thing on him is that the changeup is really good. I like it a lot. It's about 1 inch of average vertical break from a reasonable release height. The average changeup has somewhere around 5 inches, so he's killing a ton of vertical break on the pitch. Because he's a lower slot guy, that allows it to separate from the four-seam better, which is going to generate a lot of swing and miss. And it's 88 plus. I think that's one of his differentiator pitches that will help him versus lefties. The distinct problem here, not distinct thing, but the risk factor, what can be wrong about this rank is that the fastball shape is, I don't think, as good as people believe. This is, at AAA, we've seen it be like 13 to 14 inches of vertical break and 10 inches of arm side. It's 96. Again, that's going to buy back some of the, shape concerns with the offering. I'm just not entirely sure that he's going to be able to lean on this pitch 45% plus. This thing's going to have to come below 40%, and then at that point, you're really going to have to be able to strike the variation of the cutter and the sweeper he throws alongside the changeup, peripheral curveball. The Mets are doing some fun things. I got to admit, I think Christian Scott they did a great job with. We saw them make some tweaks to Paul Blackburn right after the deadline. I think he's in their wave of interesting. I would like Christian Scott better. I just don't see him as a top 5 guy yet. I think the limitation is because of the four-seam shape. Number 16, another Texas arm, Alejandro Rosario, a righty. Huge raw stuff here. He's a little bit undersized guy. He reminds me a lot of Luis Castillo in terms of how he throws. The four-seam here is probably the risk factor because it's kind of weird. It's like 13 inches of vertical and 15. So it's almost like a natural two-seam shape because of the slot he throws from. It's not carry traditionally how you'd expect, but it's also 97, 98. So that's very good. And again, buys back some of the issues here. You'll notice a theme. Velocity is very important, I think, overall on this list for trying to capture some upside on some of these pitching prospects. The thing that I like, the differentiator for him is actually the splitter. It's a really interesting pitch. There's a ton of arm side movement on it. It's about 15 inches of arm side at 91 miles per hour, and he's killing spin on the pitch. This thing is nasty if you see it visually. It just really fades right as he throws it. He can throw it right. He throws it obviously to lefties as well to help mitigate damage. The slider's a downer shape here too. He's a a pop-up arm. I didn't really have him on my radar heading into this season, but he's been fantastic. I like Rocker better, which maybe I don't know if everyone agrees with, but I'll take Rocker over him. He's a really good pitching prospect. I think he'll pop. I just wonder a little bit on the four-seam shape here, but it's super hard. Maybe that buys back all the concern I have. Number 17 is AJ Smith-Shawver, who's a righty from the Braves who's kind of flown through the minors. He's still a pretty young pitcher. I think there's good enough release traits here to kind of dream on more. It's up around 7 feet of extension, which is, I'd say, inside like the 85th percentile or so. So better than, all but 15% of major league pitchers in terms of how far down the mound he releases the ball. A little bit above average release, but he carries the ball well and he throws it hard. 17 vertical break is 1.5 inches or so over the release height he's at. And 95 miles per hour, obviously a tick above major league average. So you're betting on the four seam here. The risk factor I have is an interesting one. When they brought him back from injury, the Braves started throwing a sweeper with him a lot, AAA. I don't really think he needs a sweeper. I don't think that you need big shape for a guy that carries the ball like this. The slider I thought was great. It was like hard and 90 and it had some depth, and he also had a splitter that he could throw to righties. My risk factors here, they mess him up by throwing more sweeper. I just don't think it's too necessary for him as a pitcher. So maybe that's a hot take. I've been moving off sweepers to some extent for starting pitchers, but I want no sweeper here. Give me split, four seam, maybe play with the curve, but give me that old slider back. I hope this kind of doesn't mess him up. That's my risk factor for Smith-Shawver. Number 18 is Quinn Mathews. He's another lefty here. I have him as lefties have more fun because a lot of left-handed pitchers, what we run into is the ability for the lefty angle they create to create really good outcomes, despite the fact that overall they're not really doing anything on a shape side that's too distinct. Undersold stuff plus on lefties I see a lot, especially at the major league level and some of FanGraphs models and some other models out there. I like the fastball here, though. It's 95 miles per hour, 17 inches of vertical break, 5.5 release. That is a huge distinction. We were just talking about Smith-Shawver with the same everything, a little bit lower on extension for Quinn Mathews. But Smith-Shawver was 6 foot release, 17 vertical break. Quinn Mathews is a half a foot lower with the same vertical break from a lefty slot. I'm not entirely sure why Stuff Plus doesn't capture that this pitch is good, but I think it's very good. And I think that will carry him. You're looking for like a Cole Reagans or a Tariq Skubal carry fastball lefty with some velo. He's not throwing 98 yet. Maybe he never gets there, but I do think this is the template and mold of the pitcher that could go in the Reagans Skubal territory. Maybe there's some refinement that has to happen with some of the secondaries. I think the changeup's probably his best non-fastball pitch, but I like him. He's a guy to keep an eye on. I'm higher on him than Tink Hence, who's not on my top 20, which I know a lot of people on the Cardinals side disagree with, but I'll take the lefty with some weird shapes over Tink Hence, who's more of a command guy for me. Jairo Iriarte is a acquisition piece from the White Sox in the Dylan Cease trade. He's a righty. He's the White Sox only hope. I'm only partially kidding here. They really need him to pop. Wasn't too pleased with what I saw with Drew Thorpe at the major league level. I just don't think he has enough velocity to survive, although the changeup is one of the wackier things in baseball. But enough about Drew Thorpe. Iriarte has some really interesting shapes. This is another risk factor where I'm not entirely sure the four seam will work. It's hard, it's 94, but you saw on the guys higher in this list, they had more protection on that pitch throwing 95, 96. Iriarte's is similar, where it's like 13 vertical, 15 arm side. So it's more of like your two-seamer shape, like Alejandro we were just talking about. But I am not entirely sure that pitch is plus. It's probably more average to above average. And the thing I like, though, if you want to go back to the differentiators, he's not throwing it a lot. That's allowed him to have really good command of a changeup I like, and his slider, which is more of like a down action two-plane pitch, which is like 84 with -5 and 7 sweep. That's almost curveball territory. It's a little shorter than that, but the fact that he could zone it around average makes me think that pitch needs to be thrown like 40% of the time, which the White Sox are pushing up against in the minor leagues. I like him a lot. There's some reliever risk here for sure, and I'm not entirely sure on the fastball, but slider changeup for him are definitely strong. And our last one, our number 20, is Thomas White. He's a lefty from the Marlins. He's a high schooler they drafted in the 2023 draft. This is a rare lefty that Stuff Plus likes. I was just talking about Quinn Mathews being a guy that Stuff Plus can't really figure out. White has velocity and shape and et cetera and everything and arm side such that Stuff models do like it. I think because of how perhaps they're biased towards total movement. He does get a lot of total movement arm side on fastball changeup and on this big sweeper thing he throws. That is what you're betting on. It's lefty with good stuff, which I think is relatively rare. The four-seam shape is good. That's the distinct part. The non-distinct part is that I think this sweeper he throws is not a pitch that he can throw a lot to right-handed hitters. And I wonder how long it's going to take perhaps the Marlins, Peter Bendix in there, making some changes organizationally. I want a shorter slider here, and I think he'd be able to throw it hard. We saw this exact same thing with like a Garrett Crochet, where he comes up, pitches with the sweeper to righties, etc., gets banged up, then immediately cuts back to the cutter and absolutely decimates hitters, uses the sweeper only to lefties. White right now, I saw him at the Futures game, is kind of just ripping this sweeper thing over the plate. I just don't think that's going to work versus righties at the major league level. I want a shorter slider. The risk factor here is maybe that comes too late, or perhaps it never comes and he can never figure it out, but I think he can. He's a good number 20. This is a guy that's going to rise because of how young he is. That is my top 20 pitching prospects. I think I went a little long here. I tried to do under a minute on each guy, but that is obviously incorrect here as the timer goes above 20 minutes total. But you got to do what you got to do. Some of these guys I got carried away on, but there's just a lot to talk about because pitching prospects are really fun to analyze and think about from an organizational standpoint as well as a shape standpoint, which is not public, which is why there's value in watching my content and also reading my Substack, where you can find the 21 through 40 premium subs only, $5 a month, $30 a year will get you the entire list, the update I do in spring, some pitcher conversations I have throughout the season, as well as some other random minor league posts that I'll do throughout the year with data in it. That is always the strength. Make content that is distinct. I hope I do that as much as I can. Thank you for watching. If you have thoughts or you think I missed anybody or you strongly disagree with the rank, I want to hear it and I want you being in the comments because I will be able to respond and defend my case here on a lot of these guys. So thanks for watching as always. Take care.